It started like any other day. The sun peaked just above the horizon as I stood on the edge of my land, staring across the fields I had tended for years. My boots dug into the familiar earth, and the air was thick with the scent of dew and crops. For seasons, I had poured my sweat and soul into this soil. I had followed every traditional technique passed down from generations, used the best seeds I could afford, irrigated as needed, sprayed against pests, and prayed that nature would be kind. But despite it all, my harvests never quite matched the effort. Profits stayed slim, and I felt like I was caught in a loop of hard work with little reward. Something had to change. One evening, while scrolling through farming forums and watching videos shared by passionate growers around the world, I came across a discussion about a method that could apparently double your harvest, seemingly overnight. It sounded ridiculous at first, almost like a scam. But the more I read, the more intrigued I became. The method wasn't about buying expensive machinery or genetically modified seeds. It was about how we plant and care for the crops at a fundamental level, rethinking spacing, water, timing, and even the invisible life beneath the soil. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with ideas, and by sunrise, I had a plan. I decided to experiment on a modest portion of my land, just a test. The trick, as I learned, was rooted in intensification without overloading the soil, wider spacing of seedlings to allow more sunlight and airflow, precise watering cycles, incorporating compost teas and beneficial microbes into the soil, and transplanting at a specific younger age for shock-free rooting. It required a different rhythm, a more hands-on approach that initially seemed slower, but with each passing day, I saw the difference. The crops looked fuller, stronger, more vibrant. Their leaves were broader, greener, and their stems sturdier. Within weeks, it was undeniable, this wasn't ordinary growth. The roots dug deeper, the flowering was more consistent, and pest resistance had improved naturally. But that wasn't all. I added a clever layering system, planting 3 different crops on the same plot at varying depths and heights. Root crops below, leafy greens in the middle, and vine or tall crops rising above. This method, which I had never dared to try before, unlocked an incredible synergy. The shade of one crop protected the other, the soil remained moist longer, and pests had a harder time spreading. Each crop nourished the other indirectly, through natural cycles of root exudates and biomass. At the same time, I began practicing something even more radical, feeding the soil, not just the plant. Instead of synthetic fertilizers, I started brewing compost teas, full of microbial life, and applying them to the roots weekly. I added biochar, earthworm castings, and covered the beds with mulch from local trees and grasses. My soil began to smell alive, like a forest floor. It retained water better, resisted erosion, and after a while, I didn't need to weed as much, the mulch kept them down. And then came the harvest. I remember that day vividly, the overwhelming feeling as I looked at the bounty I had pulled from the earth. I had to call for extra labor to help collect everything. My yield from that experimental patch was more than double the rest of my field. It wasn't just more, it was better. Heavier grains, larger vegetables, and richer color. And what struck me most was how much less I had invested in this method. The inputs were cheaper, and in many cases, homemade or free. The plants were stronger on their own. I didn't have to fight as many pests, didn't have to irrigate as much. It was as if nature was finally working with me, not against me. Encouraged by this success, I extended the method to more of my land. I refined the process, customizing it for different crops. What worked for rice needed tweaking for tomatoes, and wheat needed different spacing than maize. I studied the moon cycles, tracked microclimates on my property, and even started to rotate chickens through the fields after harvests, letting them scratch, fertilize, and naturally till the soil. Every piece of the system began to align. Neighbors noticed. At first, they were skeptical, but curiosity eventually led them to my fields. I hosted a few small gatherings, then larger workshops. Farmers from nearby towns came to see. We shared techniques, adapted them to different soils and climates, and slowly a community of growers formed around these principles. Our collective yields improved, and many who were considering leaving farming altogether found new purpose and profit. My own household changed. With greater income from the improved harvest, we upgraded our equipment, educated our children better, and built storage that let us sell strategically instead of rushing to market. But more than the finances, it was the joy of farming that returned to my life. I woke up excited, eager to check the plants, to adjust a drip line or smell the compost pile. And all of this started with a trick that seemed too simple to work, rethinking the plant's environment from the roots up, trusting biology over chemistry, and remembering that farming isn't a battle with nature but a collaboration. When I say it doubled my harvest overnight, I'm not exaggerating the speed. It felt like magic, but it was science. It was observation, patience, and a willingness to shift my habits. Today, when I walk through my fields, it's like walking through a living ecosystem, not just a production zone. Bees buzz, earthworms turn the soil, birds visit the trees at the edge of the land, and I know now that this harmony is what makes a harvest flourish. The trick wasn't a product, a chemical, or a machine, it was a mindset. And that has made all the difference. I tell every farmer I meet, if your fields feel tired, if you're pouring in effort and getting less out, try changing the way you see the soil. Double your care, not your chemicals. The harvest will follow.